Hey fam, it's your girl Najee, and I'm here with
Damaris, your lovable BX honey badger.
not a honey badger. Oh
Oh
my
yeah,
gosh.
yeah. Because I don't give a shit.
That we all know. That we all know. Well, we also have hanging out with us Mark Hurst of Tectonic Radio Show. And if you all remember, he was on with us when we talked about big tech, specifically around privacy and how it impacts our daily lives. And we touched a little bit on how it impacts children. And we thought that was it was a bigger topic for us to cover more than just a few minutes. And so we had to have Mark back with us to talk about how this impacts our youth and what are some tips that we can do as parents to mitigate some of these risks that are out there. So, welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Nachi. Thanks, Damaris. It's great to be back. I really enjoyed our previous conversation, and what a pleasure to be back on the show.
Yeah, it was actually one of our top downloaded shows. Top 10 though, You're creeping up. You're getting
Oh,
closer to
that's
top
great.
five, but top 10 is great because it was a season 2 episode as well, and it was, again, for us, we're always about trying to bring awareness to our community of things that people probably don't consider in their day-to-day lives, and technology as a whole has a huge impact and influence in what we do and how we engage, interact, and think. And so when you think about how it affects us as adults, you can only imagine how it can impact the lives of the younger people in our lives, the little humans. And we want to, as our jobs as adults and guardians and parents, I feel like it's on us to ensure that we protect and provide a safe space for our kids and not expect, or at least understand, that external forces and factors don't necessarily have that in mind for your children. And we should be aware of that. So how do we go about protecting them? And so it's not just she teed up the conversation, but really excited to have it with you because you, on your show Tectonic, you explore a lot about the big tech companies and their massive influence and impact in the negative light, because we typically always see the good things, right? Like, oh, this is how technology is improving our lives and blah blah blah. But that's also a way to just keep us with blinders on and not really understand, well, with that benefit comes a lot more that you probably didn't bargain for.
That's right.
And so we want to talk about how you see, especially when we think about big tech, the social media platforms within that space that have negatively impacted children, and especially the mental health of children. Because I know, what was it, last year in 2023, where the Surgeon General, they released a social media advisory study about the potential, they always put potential because they want to put qualifiers, the potential
Right.
harm of social media on children.
That's right.
Like,
I'm
don't
going
be
to
too
remove the
scared.
qualifier.
Right. Don't be too
Yeah,
scared.
it's a harm. It's no bueno, guys.
Yes,
So
it's alarming.
can you speak a little bit about that? Yeah, it is
Sure.
alarming.
Well, I'll start with that advisory. This came from the U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy back in spring of 2022, so a couple of years ago. And whatever they were seeing a couple of years ago, you can just extrapolate that is at least as bad, probably worse, now in 2024. There was a Senate hearing on mental health issues due to adolescent social media use. Most of what we're going to be talking about is social media, not all, but there was a there was a Senate hearing on this, and there's this NYU professor named Jonathan Haidt who has written some books on this. His most recent book is called The Anxious Generation. So he's at NYU. He's written The Anxious Generation, and back in 2022, he gave Senate testimony that had the following title that he gave his testimony: "Teen mental health is plummeting, and social media is a major contributing cause." He talked about the link between these social media services and, quote, adolescent mood disorders, self-harm,
Mm.
and suicide rates. And he said to the Senate that, and again, this is a direct quote, the United States is experiencing a catastrophic wave of mood disorders, anxiety and depression, and related behaviors, self-harm and suicide. The crisis is so severe that the U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy recently issued an advisory on youth mental health. So this is an issue that, as of a couple of years ago, had risen to the top of the national discourse, at least in the political arena, getting the kind of attention that would tee up an advisory from the U.S. Surgeon General. So yes, this is an urgent problem. It has been correlated with the rise in social media services, and there has, to my knowledge, been relatively little done in the 2 years since.
Right. I don't
But
think
other
I've
than that,
seen.
everything's going great.
Everything's
Yeah.
gravy, guys.
But yeah,
Don't
please,
worry. Don't.
please, let's get back to talking up the latest iPhone model and the latest new feature on Instagram or whatever, because
Oh
they're
yeah.
just wonderful. Don't listen to the Surgeon General. Let's listen to the marketing and the advertising that we get from big tech. No,
Yeah.
Right.
this is you're right. We often hear all of the promises and the claims of this is going to change the world, it's going to improve your life so much, it's going to make everything
Mm-hmm.
so easy. What these companies obviously never talk about is the documented harms of those same products.
And I think
Right. At what
one,
cost?
yeah, yeah. And I think for, when you think about it for yourself as an adult, how it affects you, you can only imagine how it's affecting younger, children and younger adults because their frontal lobe is not even completely developed. And here you are consistently, I mean, they're consistently watching these images on social media that's promoting uh, risky behaviors that they're not able to process that. And I know, like for my kids, they want to be on every single thing. And I'm always asking, what do you need to be on that for? You're on X, Y, and Z.
Right.
So what are you
That's
getting
right.
out of this other social media platform that you don't already have on the one that you're currently on? So it's crazy. As a parent,
Well,
it's
it's
Yeah.
difficult
I
and
difficult.
mean,
challenging.
Yeah, it's difficult for parents, like you're saying. I'm a parent as well. And I've talked to a lot of parents. I mean, I feel like we're all in the same boat. The other thing is that it's difficult for the kids themselves when all of your classmates are using these services,
Yes.
mm-hmm.
Yep.
and mom says, why do you need to be on this service? I wonder if they're thinking, don't you understand? All of my friends, all of them are using
Hmm.
this,
Hmm.
this, this, and this. And if I'm the only one to step out, then where does that leave me?
Yeah.
Um,
That means you're not a lemming. Congratulations. That's
that's,
fantastic.
I know.
We don't
Well,
want to be lemmings in life, but I know,
I
I know,
agree with
they,
you.
I
they
know,
don't
I know.
receive that. And it
I just had
reminds
to
me of,
say. I just had to say it.
yeah, yeah. No, but it reminds me when my daughter, when she wanted a phone, and I think she was 12 at the time, and I said, no, I cannot. I don't see a reason
What
why you need a
justification?
phone. Right. Because I take you everywhere. I'm there with
I know
you.
where you
So
are.
I see no reason, but I remember her always just wanting a phone. And I waited until she was 13 to get her one because at that time I was leaving her at certain activities, for sports and other stuff. But I just remember that conversation so clearly where she just, she kept saying, well, everybody else have a phone. My friends have a phone. And here I have just this little iPod. I
Yeah,
mean, I don't
but
know
and I think
why you
that
need one.
right because from what what I read in some of the articles about and the Surgeon General warning these mental or rather the negative impact has been things around like anxiety and as you mentioned, Mark,
Hmm.
depression. And I also feel like it contributes to body dysmorphia, especially for girls who may already start to, you're going through puberty, your body's changing, and for boys and girls. But I think I can speak for girls, how that can feel during that time in your life. And 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 I don't see how following, especially many people that you don't even know personally, really helps your mental state and like feeling good
Right.
about yourself. And I also think it contributes to a lack of awareness, right? I was listening to an episode that you recommended, Mark, on your show with these young people, these teenagers that started the club of members of the Luddite Club in New York City. And they talked about how when people are just on their phones, they're not paying attention, they're just walking, bumping into
Mm-hmm.
people. And that lack of awareness is just mind boggling to me because I remember, and actually, growing up in New York City at the time that we did, when we were teenagers, it was in the 90s. New York City was definitely not nice. Not
Right.
nice. And
You
so
have to be
the
always
idea
aware.
of
Yes.
Yes. And so the
Yes.
idea of like my head is just down. And even now, I think it's ridiculous that you would still be so consumed on your phone on a New York City street because you should always be aware of your surroundings. And
Mm-hmm.
for us, it was more so about safety and how our father raises and ingrained in us. You need to be aware of everything that's happening around you. We're young ladies. He's like, be aware. Here's a little weapon. But this is why we
Be
are the way we
prepared.
are.
Right.
Right. In that
What was it,
interview,
Damaris? Was it a taser? Can you
it
reveal
was
what the
like
weapon?
it was like little knives, little
Yeah,
like
I had like a
sprays.
concoction. I
Yeah,
swear
yeah.
it was like
Yeah, yeah. It was like
some
a
acid,
spray,
like
like,
I don't
oh,
know
spray
what it
it in their
was.
eyes. He said, spray it in their eyes and run away. We're like, okay, yes, Poppy, whatever you say.
Oh my gosh.
And
We
so
would
it's funny,
not
like
get through
sidebar.
any metal detector at schools
Right.
today.
No,
Let's just
no,
put it
today,
that
please,
way.
please. Yeah, no. I mean, but the thing is, we went to Catholic high school, so they didn't have metal detectors anyway,
Yeah.
but we were getting on the trains and on the buses, so we were ready. But yeah, no, I mean, may God rest his soul. Look, I'm
Oh my
happy for the way I am
gosh.
right now. But then I think back. Well, one of the things that one of your guests on that show mentioned, maybe it might have been Jameson. They said about the it helped them to get off their phone because it allowed them to be more present in their life, right? Being on their phone was a very passive way of living because you're always
Hmm.
looking down, you're always scrolling, you're not doing anything active. Whereas if you don't have that device in front of you, or as Mark would call it, your surveillance device, if you don't have that
Right.
surveillance device, then you actually become more present. And I think that's to me one of the negative impacts of like this whole social media and being on your phone all the time is because you're not present.
Yeah.
That's
and
right.
Yeah.
and it then contributes to all these other mental anxiety and you know disorders where you could alleviate that if you just got rid of that shit. But I know it's not that simple, but I think there are ways
Hmm.
to go about it. But then, I want to be fair and balanced to some degree. What are positive things from social media for children?
Well, there are some cases in which young people can connect with each other in healthy ways. It's not like every single direct message is this awful
Hmm.
thing making them feel bad about themselves. There have been some studies somewhat countering Jonathan Haidt's research saying not all social media is bad, not all device usage is bad, not all screen time is bad, but you have to use it judiciously and thoughtfully. And
Hmm.
really, those studies, they're trying to counter what Haidt was saying, but I think they come around to the same message, which is you have to use it differently from how these services want you to use them.
Yes.
Because
Yes,
Damaris,
absolutely.
they want you to be passive. They
Yes.
Hmm.
want you to sit there and scroll because that's
Non-stop.
nonstop
Mm-hmm.
because that's how they make money. So
Yep.
they have this metric of engagement or time on device, and
Mm-hmm.
they want to just maximize that. And so they have teams of psychologists who put in these little manipulations in the interface. By the way, that were borrowed from research in into slot machines. Slot machine design was really the first
Right.
area of interface design to keep people engaged. there's a great book called Addiction by Design by someone named Natasha Dow-Scholl. She spoke at my GEL conference years ago about that book, and it's still relevant today, how slot machine designers really were trying to exploit their users. I thought at the time, years ago, what an awful way to spend your career as a designer, trying to exploit people.
Right.
And then it all exploded into the entire social media ecosystem and even beyond. So when you say, how can we use social media for good? I mean, first thing you can do is get off social media. And I mean, that's a great way. That's a great usage.
Just get
But
off.
if
Yes.
you want to moderate that,
That's it.
still use it, but use it thoughtfully and use it
Yeah.
Right.
judiciously. Well, how are you going to do that? Again, you have to resist all those manipulations that have been put into the system.
Right.
And as Nachi, as you've said a couple of times, it's hard enough for us as adults. How hard is it going to be for someone with a developing brain to think, well, now I need to be thoughtful and I need to
Right.
outsmart all these psychologists
Yeah.
at Facebook or Instagram or TikTok in order to use this judiciously so I can get some genuinely good outcomes. It's unlikely to happen. And I think that's why these young members of the Luddite Club you were bringing up, Damaris, they're well aware. They've done the reading. They're well aware of the research. They have chosen out of the panoply of options for how to react to this exploitative technology, they've chosen to get off it completely. That's their way of creating good outcomes. So rather than saying constantly, let me wrestle with TikTok and set a timer and only look at good videos and send a nice text to my, and like all these rules that you're going to self-impose to somehow resist the bad effects, just throw the whole freaking thing away and say, I'm going to read a print book. Or as one of the members told me, I've taken up reading, sewing, sculpting, drawing, painting, and free classes because the many hours a week that she's no longer on social media has opened up all this time for her to learn all these
Yep.
other things.
Right.
And then she gets socialization thrown in because she's drawing with friends or taking a class with friends.
Right.
And so you get
Right.
all of the good outcomes and none of the bad outcomes. I think that's eventually, if people really dig in, they find that's the best way out of this.
Yeah, I
Right.
think people
Right.
forget that real engagement that you get from face-to-face interaction and being able and I actually enjoyed when they had said that they picked up other hobbies, and
Right.
I was impressed because I kind of going back to my kids, especially my daughter, both of them really, I would say, why don't you find something else that's more enjoyable? Let's, pick a hobby. Let's, my daughter specifically, she loves art. She always enjoyed it. But when you try to push her to just, hey, why don't you focus on that? Then, you know, looking at your phone and being on or trying to do the latest TikTok dance. Why don't you
She's like
do
lame.
more, right? Do more of the artwork that you used to love doing. What's going on with that? So I loved hearing how it automatically was, they were drawn to it because, hey, I have all this free time. I'm not on my phone. So what else can I do? I'm reading more and I'm taking sewing. This is something that I was doing before. And now that I have more time, I'm gonna continue doing that, do more of it. So I love that positive effect of removing technology, and not all, I mean, and they've said that too,
Yeah, I
they're
mean, I
not
think it needs to
completely.
be a balance.
Yeah.
Right.
Hmm.
Because it's kind of hard to be completely inseparable in
Yeah.
today's society. Like today's
Right.
day and age, you really can't. But I'd like to just going back to the tech companies. I really want to understand, how are they benefiting from specifically targeting children? Because I think that's going to really open up the eyes for parents and understanding how insidious these big tech companies really are out there and how they're targeting your children specifically.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk numbers first. This comes from a Pew Research study from last December. This is a Teens Social Media and Technology 2023 research report. So this is their most current report on teen usage. As of that report, you know, a percentage of American teens have or have access to a smartphone, or as I would say, a surveillance phone. It's
I believe that.
95%. Now, that does not count flip phones. Flip phones, you know, you can still text, you can still call. That's
Mm-hmm.
not flip phones. Surveillance phones,
Wow.
iPhones and Android surveillance phones, 95%. And then they're using those phones. We call them phones, but of course they're not using them for phone calls,
Right,
because
Right.
right. They're
phone
using it
calls
for.
are, the real-time interaction. So, they're using them largely for apps. And so what are the apps that the teenagers are using? There's one that's the dominant app both for boys and girls, because there are some differences by gender, but for both
Mm-hmm.
boys and girls, the number one app is YouTube.
Yeah.
9 out of 10 teenagers say they use YouTube. That's, as Pew says, it's the most widely used platform measured in the survey. And then after YouTube, the next three, there's three other really big ones, and that is Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok. And so you've got teens from 13 to 17, 63% use TikTok. If you go to 15 to 17-year-olds, that's 70% of American teenagers are on TikTok. That's just staggering. And then Snapchat is a little bit less, and Instagram is a little bit less. So now we can talk about, and let me talk about the gender differences. For teenage girls, they're somewhat more likely to use TikTok and Snapchat than the boys, whereas Instagram and YouTube are about the same between boys and girls. So that means there's something on TikTok and Snapchat that's really attracting and holding the attention of girls. So now we get to the business model. YouTube, with all four of these, YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, all have the same business model, and that's advertising. Well, I should say advertising and surveillance, which then feeds back into the advertising. But that's a whole other
Right.
conversation.
Because they
Go back
need to
to
understand. Right.
our
Right.
previous conversation on the podcast was about how these companies destroy your privacy for profit.
Yes.
And so
Mm-hmm.
there is that. But for right now, let's just call it advertising. So YouTube, for example, I'm sure you've seen ads pop up on YouTube. The more videos you watch, the more ads you'll end up seeing. Similarly, in TikTok, now TikTok, the videos are a lot shorter, and the navigation is a lot more, I guess, bare bones, because all you're doing is swiping to get the next video.
Mm-hmm.
But there's ad revenue in there as well that correlates to the number of videos and the amount of time you're spending on the app. So the entire business model of these companies is predicated on getting people to not put down the phone. And it's not like, well, we need to come up with high quality content that's well written, has a positive message, nicely edited.
Like our
No.
podcast.
Yes, exactly. It's not that. It's not the high quality content. The content that keeps people glued to their phone, the addictive content, tends to be in the broad scale of things. It tends to be the content that is that's harmful in some way. It could be deceptive. It could be anxiety producing. It could be amplifying hate. It could be incitement to violence. It tends to be, it's just, for whatever reason, the way the human brain is wired, we tend to lock onto things that are outrageous in some way. What?
Right. Right.
He said what? You know, and so the algorithms are going to tend to serve up things that keep people so glued to their phones that it resembles addiction. And some people say it is addiction and addictive content, much like if you look at addictive substances that people ingest, the addictive substances are the ones that are not good for you. There are
Mm-hmm.
no really healthy addictions.
No.
Like,
No one's addicted to quinoa.
right. hey, have you worked on your quinoa addiction? Have you stopped eating so much spinach? I'm concerned
Right.
about your broccoli intake. No,
Seriously.
it's the bad stuff. And so the
Mhm.
algorithm, it's not like these companies necessarily set out to do bad things, although people may question that in the character of Mark Zuckerberg. But moving on from that, it's more that the designers of the algorithms created these services in order to elevate whatever content would keep the eyeballs glued to the screen, and they let it go. And so that's how we end up with this system with addictive devices that are making the companies tons and tons of money, and are inevitably creating these horrible externalities,
Hmm.
these negative health effects on these teenage users. That's how the
It,
whole system works. It's by design. It's not an
right, right.
accident.
And you have a really good blog article on your Creative Goods site that that asks, are Facebook and Google criminal enterprises?
Yeah, that was one of my
Yes.
favorites from a few years ago.
Yeah, yeah. It was from like, yeah, 2021, I think, or 2022, but it's still relevant, right? And as I was reading it, it's just, again, like I need to highlight these things because it's so important. But what you found is that these platforms are pushing, like you mentioned, ads for things like illicit drugs. They like, I think there was something, there was an article, it connected to an article maybe on CNN or some other platform, that it only takes 2 clicks to act to get in touch with a drug dealer, right? Like to get
That's crazy.
illegal drugs. Yeah. And so, but they keep putting these ads up and they don't do anything to take them down because they make money, as you've already mentioned, Mark.
Mhm.
It's more engagement means more money for the big tech companies. So there is no incentive for them to not do that. Only when they're called to task by the government or law enforcement do they actually say, "Oh, I didn't realize we were doing this, and we're
Yeah.
going to scramble. We're going to take this down." And then what I'm finding is that when the noise settles, it gets quieter, they go back up. Like it's still there, right? It's just, okay, no one's saying anything right now,
Right.
so let's just remain under the radar. But they're promoting things that connect to human trafficking, illicit drug use, like I mentioned, fentanyl. Like, it's just so many things. And of course, you're not monitoring every single thing, every page that your child is coming across, but you also can't even control that because it's all being driven by an algorithm. So the more they engage, the more they know, like, oh, okay, well, keep pushing this to these kids. And again, impressionable minds. I think about the stupid shit we got into, and we didn't even
Oh
have these
yes.
devices
No.
in high school. When I think back, like, grateful that
Oh
we
my
didn't die, we didn't
gosh.
get caught up in something stupid, but going to, people's homes with your friend, because your friend is like, come on, let's go check this out. We could have been in after school special so many times. So
So
That's
many
great.
times.
I think
Oh
of,
my gosh.
yeah, and so now I'm like, it's so, all you need to do is click 2 times to be an after school special. This is just, it's too much.
You were
Yeah,
So
it's
you were
wild.
this close to Charlie Brown walking out at the end and saying, to learn what Damaris did wrong, go to your local library. I'm conflating two different
Oh
after school
my
specials,
I
but
know,
I
I
think you know
know,
what
I
I
know.
mean.
Look,
But we
but
know what you're talking
if
about.
you grew, yeah, if you know, you know. Whatever. If you don't,
Oh,
just let it
What
go,
was it?
let it
The
fly.
more you know. The
The
more
more
you
you
know.
know. Right, with the little bursts, the little
Yes.
starbursts.
oh my gosh.
So, and I think I'm just wondering, how are they getting away with targeting children? Like, why?
Well, that's an excellent question. How are they getting away with it? I mean, that old column, our Facebook and Google criminal enterprises question mark. I mean, the thrust of the column was, if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck and it quacks
Hmm.
like a duck, draw your own conclusions. But here are companies that are enabling the largest illegal drug marketplace in the history of the world, and not in, choose some other country. Right here in the US of A, these are American countries. And there have been congressional hearings with parents of children who went onto Facebook Marketplace or found an ad on Instagram or wherever, they see an ad for an opioid that they want to try one hit of, and they buy it very easily. There's Facebook and these other companies don't take these down, as you said. It comes in the mail, and of course, the whole thing, in order for the supplier to cut costs, it's cut with fentanyl,
Oh
which
gosh.
is an incredibly dangerous drug. I mean, any more than just a little bit is a lethal
Right.
dose.
Mm-hmm.
And the kid takes one pill, dead. And the parents go, and he was a good kid, and so on.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like you said, teenagers, they experiment with things. They do
They're still
occasionally.
developing.
They're
Yeah.
developing. They
Right.
do
Yeah.
dumb
I
things.
mean,
But
mm-hmm.
now these services, which are the most powerful companies in the world, are enabling this kind of tragedy to happen. The parents come to Capitol Hill. They give this heartbreaking testimony of what happened at the hands of these unethical tech giants. And the tech giants go, "Oh, we're sorry. We will endeavor to redouble our efforts to," and then it just goes back to business as
Right.
usual.
Mm-hmm.
So then you go, all right, well, then we need regulation. Okay, let me ask you this: how are both of you feeling about our regulatory environment
Right.
after last week? I mean, do you
Boy,
do you think we're headed into a golden age of responsible governmenting in the U.S. of A?
have we ever?
To each
Right.
his or her own, but I'm not feeling so hopeful about that.
All right.
And so you've got trillion, 2 trillion, and now $3 trillion companies that are controlling, unilaterally controlling the interactions between kids and their friends, between kids and their parents, between
Mm-hmm.
kids and their teachers, between kids and the rest of their lives. And the companies say, we are here for growth at any cost, profit at any cost. The only thing we hate is bad PR. So if there's one little blow up, we'll play whack-a-mole and we'll make that one go away. But otherwise, keep the profit engine going. And the government, I mean, I guess there have been some members of Congress who have tried valiantly to do something about this. David Cicilline, who's no longer in the House of Representatives, from Rhode Island, was a great example. There have been some, but after years of attempts to rein in the tech giants, you tell me, how are we doing? What's the and now the owner of the service that used to be called Twitter is now hanging out with the president elect, and I think all bets are off. So
Yeah.
when we talked about this show ahead of time, you said, let's make sure that we talk about solutions. Well, before last Tuesday, maybe one solution in small text might have been a remote possibility of some meaningful regulations
Right.
against these tech giants. Now, in this new age that we're headed into, I'd go ahead and cross that off. A miracle could occur, and I'd be delighted. But I think that we just have to be prepared for the government not to be working to oppose these giants, but instead to be hand in hand with them. And in that case, if that unfortunate outcome it turns out to be reality, then what's our next step? And all I can think is we have to band together as families, as clubs, as communities, little groups of people, not individuals. We have to work together, little groups of people who are saying, we're going to support each other as we together say no to these big tech giants. And a great example is that Luddite Club. Keep in mind, it's important to notice these teenagers who were in the studio, none of them are operating alone. It's too difficult to go alone,
Right.
to yeet
Right.
yourself
They
out of
created a
your social.
community.
They created their own community,
Yep.
and they're not being judgmental of others. They're really
Mm-hmm.
they're doing exactly right. They're welcoming if people want to join. They're not judgmental if people don't want to join. But this is what they're doing. It's a really nice community. That's our solution here, is to have conversations within our families, within our friend circles, within our communities. Whatever, you could have a spiritual community or a civic community. Have conversations and say, hey, how about we take a stand against these awful Californian and Washington state giants that want to harm us and our kids, and let's do something different. What are some things we can hold each other to? That's our next step, I think, at least for the next 4 years.
Yeah, I agree. I also think my question too was around, okay, so how are they getting away with this, and are there laws to prevent this? And it's not so much because I always view the government as having the solution to everything, because if anyone listens to this show regularly, they know how I feel about the government. So, but since
Yay,
you
government. I know you,
right.
Damaris.
I love the government. CIA, we're friends. Uh, FBI, great people. But no,
CIA, since you're listening and taking a transcript of this,
right,
and
Right.
it's going to be sent to your data center in Utah, we
I
love
love
what you're doing.
I love three-letter agencies. Right,
Keep up the
but
great work.
right? No, so I'm I'm not discouraged by recent results of this election, because there wasn't an election. But the because simply because I find that we've had years as a government to do something. We've had studies already, shared, and Surgeon General advisories, and we are still not, well, rather, the government still hasn't done much of anything to make significant change. So I do think at this point, and I think it's probably been more obvious probably in the last 2 years with the lack of movement on the government side and our elected officials, it's that, look, this is going to be incumbent upon the people, and to your point, the community. And this is why, again, why Nachi and I have this podcast to share with our community and to get them to understand, okay, this is what's really happening, because we get caught up in our day to day. You may not realize, like, your children are under attack. I'm not
Right.
even
Yeah.
joking.
Yeah.
It's facts. They're under attack, but you can do something about it. We have choices in life, and again, this comes from a place of love and not judgment, because everyone is dealing with their own thing and figuring out how to work with their kids. But this we can't rely on anyone else to help us with what's going on, because big tech is going to do what big tech wants to do. And as long as they're providing, they're sponsoring these politicians, because they're sponsoring them when they give them these contributions. So guess what? They got lobbyists. We don't have lobbyists. As a regular person, we don't.
Right.
But
Right.
our lobbying is our voice, and my platform are the people that are our listeners. We're here for
That's right.
you. So
Exactly.
I'm not too sad, because I do feel like, especially after listening to your episode with the Luddite Club and those young people, there are a lot of people that are coming to that realization of self actualization, really taking the time to be present. And one of the things that one of the young members mentioned around not having that device and not being on their surveillance device, it really forced them to be with themselves and just to sit with themselves, right? And then think about, okay, what do they want to do? And not
Right.
like, oh, what do I want to do in 5, 10 years? It's like, what do I want to do today? That requires
Right.
physical activity. And
That's
so
right.
I'm hopeful, and I think as long as we keep having these conversations and actively doing things, and we can get into these tips. But there is something that I want to go back to when we talked about what the things that these companies are doing, that, like, what they're promoting and their advertising. The other thing I remember reading a few years ago, and I think you can expand upon this, Mark, is the idea that, especially YouTube, it's well, primarily YouTube, but it is a safe haven for pedophiles. And I don't say that lightly, but I'm being serious in the fact that the way they advertise and the way the algorithm is presented, they are creating a space for them to target children in a way that's really dangerous. And so, and I love to hear your thoughts about what you've learned about that and what you're aware of as far as
Yeah, this came from a Senate hearing. I'd have to look up the year, maybe 2021. And I wrote a column, an outraged column called "Google Profits from Pedophiles," and the problem that was brought up in some questioning in the Senate hearing room was about the YouTube recommendation algorithm. Just to make sure all the listeners understand, YouTube is owned by Google. So the YouTube recommendation algorithm is making Google money. Basically, this is the algorithm that decides what's going to come next up on the autoplay. And even if autoplay is turned off, what are the recommended videos down the right side of the screen when the video you're watching finishes up? And what researchers found, this was a story in the New York Times, if I remember right, what the researchers found is that when parents would upload to YouTube a brief video of their time at the beach, for example, and their kids, like their 9-year-old daughter in a bathing suit is shown for a few seconds frolicking the waves. This is a video that they would post. Maybe they would show it to a couple of other family members. Here we are at the beach. Suddenly it would get thousands and thousands of views, and they couldn't figure out why their home video was getting so many views so quickly. The answer is that the recommendation algorithm, the YouTube recommendation algorithm, would find these videos with kids in bathing suits, and it would send them as recommended videos to these guys that through their activity had been shown to watch that kind of video. In other words, pedophiles. So
Right.
the YouTube recommendation, and let me make it clear, it's not, no one said that YouTube engineers wrote in something to enable pedophiles. There was nothing like that. It was just an outcome, a natural outcome of this optimization for engagement. So anything that would get a certain user to keep watching is going to get sent to them. And I think Google's position is, look, we can't police every single type of video and who it gets sent to. There's like a bajillion videos. And my answer would be, well, this is a problem with your human free, moderation free
right,
system of sending any kind of information to any kind of person and then profiting from that.
growth at any cost, right?
Growth at any cost. That's exactly the same thing that is behind this growth in the illegal drug market on these social media services. Again, it's not like they said, you're the VP of illegal drugs, go grow the market. It was just, they wrote a system for engagement and they took out all the moderators, or they never put in any moderators. That's really the problem. Without any meaningful investment in moderation to cut down on the bad stuff, horrible stuff ends up happening, and it scales to the whole world. And so you end up with these awful outcomes like Google profiting from pedophiles. I don't know if that's still going on at YouTube. Maybe they changed it in the several years since, but that's the kind of thing that is creating the outcomes that we're talking about in this whole conversation.
Right. And so let's get into what can parents do
Okay.
to,
This
right? Because I think, no, there's so, it's, it can seem overwhelming and depressing, but I also feel like, look, there are things that can be done to address it. This doesn't have
totally
to be the end of the world for you, because as we've already mentioned, you could throw out your surveillance device, or you can just moderate how you use it,
Right.
and ensure you're moderating how your children use it as well. I think about Nachi and her parenting style. Sometimes it's like, Joe Clark from Lean on Me. And she's like, can be, a very great disciplinarian, but she also wants to be her children's best friend. So figure, well, we'll see how that works out for her. But
The two
especially you
opposites
two
just
are the
clash
parents.
all the time.
I know. Uh, but I'm curious to hear from the parents. And I also, from my own little search, found some tips. But I want to hear from you guys about how do you minimize the role of tech in your children's lives? How can you do this in a positive way, or
Well,
um,
effective,
one
actually?
Yeah.
You want to go first, Nachi?
Well, I could share one thing that I've done. So if for those with iPhone who are iPhone users, I set certain controls, parental controls on our family plan. So I'm able to shut down their phone at a certain time. They don't have access to certain apps. I do limit the time on apps that I know that I don't really like, but they tend to go on it, whether it's on their computer. So I try to shut that down, give limitations on access to specific sites on their phone. So even if they don't have the app, they can't go into that particular website. So I have, you know, I'll give an example like Snapchat. Not my favorite. Um, so I put a limitation of like 1 minute on their phone so they can't get on the website or the app. And that's it. I'm sorry. You just won't be on it from your phone, or since they're always using their phone, that's their way of access. So it makes it a little bit more difficult for them to use it. So I'm not going to say that they don't have, because again, if we remember when we were young, we found ways to get around
Oh
some
yeah.
of these rules. But again, I think and one other thing that I did learn, and this is through um, someone I've been following, and she talks a lot about this and protecting children and technology. And one of the things she shared about Snapchat in particular, step one is really to have that conversation with your children. And Mark, I remember you had mentioned just having those talk with your family, so that they kind of understand where you're coming from, but at the same time understanding, okay, we understand that that's what you want to do and you want to use this particular platform. So coming to a compromise. And I think Snapchat now has sort of like a family plan, and I'm still looking into it to figure out.
Family plan. Fuck
Not
out
a
of here.
family plan, but
I'm
it's just
doing
like a
this.
family
No, I know, but
circle where you can kind of
yeah.
connect and be able to
No, I'm not
view what's
Snapchatting with
going
my
on. No,
parents'
you're not
kids. No,
Snapchatting,
no.
but you're connected with them.
Yeah, I'm so old. I'm like, I'm not Snapchatting. I don't even know if that's what they say.
I'm not snapping with you.
Okay,
But
all
she
right. Well,
takes a
that's
more
good to know.
realistic, yeah, she takes a more realistic approach, like because she comes from her own personal experience. She's a young woman, and she talks about her experience when she met someone online that she never met face to face, and she was literally going to run away from home to meet this man. And it wasn't until like her mother said something, like it wasn't, her mother wasn't trying to stop her, but something didn't sit well with her mom, and she basically kind of shared with her, listen, I don't know what you're going through, but please consider just, staying home. Let's talk about it. And just something came over her, and she decided not to move forward with running away. Like her mother didn't say, don't you go away. I'm lock this door. You're not going anywhere. She didn't make it difficult, but she just kind of talked to her like a person. And I know that's sometimes difficult for Dominican moms. Like
Yeah, I'm
myself.
like in that scenario. I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about because I
Yeah,
just feel
yeah,
like that's.
no, but
But God
she,
bless, it worked out. It
right.
worked
It
out. It
was,
worked out,
it was
Nashi.
realistic because she's like, let's face it, there's just so much going on that sometimes you have to kind of meet them on their level in a
Yeah,
way
yeah. You have
so that
to
they can
come to
understand, right? So that they can
so
understand.
they can be
So,
receptive.
right. So she does talk a lot about setting these parental controls on your phone. And so I do have that. I set, limits, screen time on their phone. I turn off the Wi-Fi at my home after a certain time. So even if you want to get on your computer, you won't. I try to limit that with Wi-Fi time and limitations on their phone and screen time. So that's just one of the things that I've done to help out.
And what about you,
That's
Mark?
well. I wanted to share 3 tips, and these are two of them came from Jonathan Haidt, who I mentioned before. Another one is
Mm-hmm.
from Jean Twenge, who's an author and researcher on these issues. And so here are the three tips. I've seen them a couple of different places. They're very simple, but maybe difficult to enforce. But number one, no smartphone before high school.
Yeah.
Yes.
They're
Hmm.
saying you only give a flip phone when the kid is in elementary and middle school, because they can still text you if they need help. They can still make a phone call and so on, but no
That makes
surveillance phone, no
sense.
iPhone, no Android surveillance until high school. There's actually an organization called Wait Until Eighth, which advocates no smartphone until eighth grade
Hmm.
rather than the ninth. And I think it's waituntil8th.org. You can look it up on your favorite non-Google search engine, but not no surveillance phone before high school. That's one. Number two is no social media before age 16. And this gets to a lot of the research we talked about earlier, that from ages 13 through 15, there's and even before age 13, there's millions of kids on these services, and they're being affected in all sorts of ways. They're really, really bad for their mental health. So understanding that teenagers like social media, maybe there are some positives along the way with social media. At least don't let them start until 16, when they can have a little better discernment about when is the right time. Even then, there's still potential harms, but no social media at all until 16. And then one more, which is really easy to, again, these are easy to say, maybe harder to put into practice, but keep the phone out of the bedroom at night. And that's really important, because a lot of kids will, first thing in the morning, as soon as they wake up, they're on the screen. Or the
Hmm.
last thing they do before they go to sleep is they're on the screen. And of course, then they have trouble sleeping. And
Yeah.
what do when they have trouble sleeping? They wake up in the middle of the night. I guess I'll turn on the screen, which makes it harder to fall back asleep, which makes them not sleep well. So if you just keep the phone, I think this is a good policy for adults as well. Keep the phone out of the bedroom. It's still there in the living room if you need it.
Right.
And you can still get up in the morning and get to it, but it's just not the first thing that you look at, when you wake up in the morning. You don't want to start your day with a blast of big tech nonsense in your face.
Hmm.
Um, just leave it physically a little bit outside of your bedroom. So those are the three: no smartphone before high school, no social media before age 16, and keep the phone out of the bedroom at night. I think if every parent was able to pull that off, those three tips, as well as yours, Nachi, the thoughtful use of settings and family plans and so on, we'd be in a much better place.
And
Yeah,
one
and even
thing's
for those who trying to limit what their kids download in terms of apps, because I know that whole no social media before 16 can be sometimes hard. Uh, Even there are controls on your, at least for iPhone, I know that you can set in terms of your child would need to ask permission to download apps. So
Apps, that's right.
yeah. So if that is something that you're considering and you're looking into, know that there is a feature on your iPhone that you can make sure that your children are asking uh, permission to download apps on their phone. So,
and one thing I wanted to add, because you guys took all of my tips, thank you, is that this one is easy. They mentioned turn off notifications, which is something that I do anyway, and I think you do too, Nachi.
hmm,
So
hmm.
without the notifications, I only then go to the app when I have the time to go into it, versus I'm notified and I feel compelled to go into it because, oh my God, Susie said what? So it works for adults, but it's also great for kids because then they're
Hmm.
just not distracted as much. But
Right.
n- nonetheless, I think there were really great tips there for the children, and I think plenty for parents to do for themselves too, or guardians,
Yeah.
whoever in your life. But the the point is that, look, we want this to be a safe space for children, and we need to protect our kids at all costs, and we cannot rely on big tech companies to do that because they never will. What's important to them is making money, and that's just what we need to accept. There's no altruistic, goal for them. How do you make money? It's not going to work. So
Mm-hmm.
the math doesn't math, guys. Otherwise, but once you accept that, then you can approach your engagement with these platforms in a much more sensible way. And there's no despair because you know exactly what you're going to get in return. So I hope our listeners enjoyed this episode because I did. And as always, I'm learning from Mark and reminding myself to get off of Google. I'm trying in small different ways, but
It is hard.
it is.
Little by little.
Yes, yes. So we got to try in however way we can. And again, it's a judgment free zone. So do what you can. Start off small steps. Take small bites. Don't become overwhelmed. But you know what's out there, and awareness is the first step.
Yeah.
So what GI Joe says it all the time, right? Knowing is half the battle, guys.
Yes, it is.
That's that said, let's just close out like we always do and just remind our listeners that there's a lot of noise out there, but our message is consistent. Don't get distracted by the smoke and mirrors. Tune out the noise. Focus on your divine purpose in life and vibrate higher to elevate your frequency. And always, thank you for listening.